Ave María, qué calor. Así en Miami, que no se puede aguantar. Y aguacero no quiere caer, no señor. Quisiera yo hablar con Dios, pa' que me quite este calor. Ave María, qué calor. Bueno, Ave María, qué calor.
Okay.
Miami cogió candela. Me llamo yo.
Sí.
Like that's
Sí, está bien, pero eso ahí. Ahí, aquí. Ven. Para adelante. Atrás. Okay. Hello. We're here today in Empire State College in the office of Dr. Fullard, and very inspirational. And I'm here to just have a wonderful discussion with my guest, Tony Haywood. Say hello.
Hi, everybody.
And we're going to just run the discussion a little bit and ask you, our audience, what do you think when you encounter people of African descent? And specifically, what about people of Latino heritage? So just sit back and relax. My name is Margaret Blair, and I'm here to talk to you today about topics about resilience, determination, and diversity on the Afro-Latino Connection. All right. As I said, we're here today on the Afro-Latino Connection. That's what we're calling it, an inaugural program. And our discussion is going to surround topics about the diversity of the diaspora. Let me just introduce my guest here today. This is Tony Haywood of Caribbean descent. We have a couple of things in common. Specifically, he is of Cuban descent, just like I am, and he's specifically of Bahamian descent as well. And he's a graduate of Empire State College. And after completing his BS degree?
Bachelor's, yep. Bachelor's in Science.
Bachelor's in Science degree in Finance. Mm-hmm. He continued to study finance at St. Peter's University. He graduated St. Peter's with an MBA in finance, and he currently works with J.P. Morgan Chase in investigations. But he still finds time to travel. And each year, he visits the country of Cuba, connecting to his roots. Isn't that what we do? Yeah. So this is what we're going to do today here on the Afro-Latino Connection. We're going to explore some topics around the diaspora, specifically about the economy. Mm-hmm. All right. So since that's his background, he's going to just share his sentiments with me about how he feels Latin American people are faring in this economy. What is the perceptions that you think people have if they're coping in today's society. Let me just let you think about that and go in a little bit about what it means to be Afro-Latino. An Afro-Latino is someone of Latin American and African ancestry. We are Black
Exactly.
in our in our identity, but we have experiences sometimes that may seem invisible. We were discussing a little bit earlier that sometimes it's hard to discuss your African heritage with people, and specifically, what does it mean when they are combined? You're Latino, you're African. Not everybody wants to engage in those type of conversations, and I'm going to open that up and have these conversations going, because I think that, especially if we're, I don't know, in the film industry, we're not, but do you see a unique representation of Afro Latinos? If I say Latino, like I opened up today's segment, what do you think about when you think about people of African descent? And what do you think about people of Latino heritage? What do you think about? Do you hear those questions explored uniquely on mainstream media, radio, talk shows? Do we talk too much about that? Not that much, at least not in my experience. So today, this is what I'm intending to do. We're going to explore things that concerns us as Afro-Latinos, and it means a lot to be African and Latino. You have any specific experiences that you would like to share about what it means to be African and Latino? It means a lot. We're bringing together a couple of things, but how do you feel about it?
No, for me, I would always feel proud, just to be of Latin American descent and African at the same time, African descent. Specifically because it's a blend of two similar yet distinct cultures. So when you're talking about that, it's almost like you're a bowl of salad, but you have the best ingredients, and people see you, and it's like, wow, I really want to try that salad. Or I really want to know what that salad is like, because they've never really came into contact with that. It's basically, you've been eating Cobb salad your whole life, and next thing you know, they added some chicken, some turkey, other things into the mix, and it's like, wow, you're very unique. But
Yes.
on the, on another note, we still exist.
We exist. Put your chair up.
Of course, we still exist, and we still are plenty bountiful in Latin American countries, especially Cuba and Colombia, countries where I visited a lot, where there's this like a plethora of people of African descent. When you go to these cities, these historic cities like Cartagena, La Habana, Matanzas, Cuba, those cities like that, where you can see the culture, you can see it represented. Um, and it's just so good to talk to someone who looks like you and who shares the same experience, but they see it through a different lens.
Thank you.
Being that they're from a different country and they've experienced what it means to be, a person of color in their own country. It's a lot different being Black in Cuba than it is being Black in the U.S. There's still certain things like racism and things of that nature to overcome, but when you share that with that person, it's like kind of like you knew that person your whole life, but it's like, okay, now it makes sense. And you're able to connect with that person and build a friend. It's like everywhere you go, someone looks like you, and that's the best. That's the best feeling in the world, because everywhere is your home.
I love that. I love what you
Everywhere is your home.
said. I love what you said, because there is a myth that that you visit some place like Cuba and you won't see racism much. That's a myth, right? You do,
Yes,
but it is a
definitely.
little bit different than here in the States. That we do know.
Yeah,
It is a bit different.
It's more of it's not as so much in your face.
Right.
Because if you go down to a lot of the places where the tourists are, a lot of the tourists are European, mostly white-skinned Europeans, and white-skinned South American people who generally have money. So let's say you come from, um, let's say you're a citizen of Cuba and you happen to be of African descent. You want to enjoy those same amenities that people like tourists and people who come from other countries enjoy, like taking taxis, simple things like that. There's a different system for you in order to navigate your own city. So Cuba, unfortunately tends to treat people with lighter skin from different countries a lot better than their own citizens, which is what I see a lot. It's getting a lot better. In the 40s there were the sections where they had colored people only. I mean, I think most people
in Cuba.
and in Cuba, when you take the trains across the different provinces, if anyone saw the Celia novela, they had a part where she was on the train and everyone had to sit in the back because they were considered people of color, negros.
Good point.
So just in case people didn't realize that did exist before it does. So that lens or that gives you an idea that, okay, although our countries are different, the past was the same. Segregation was still there, and you're still basically treated as a second-class citizen.
Right. So the African diaspora
Mm-hmm.
shares a lot. We share a lot.
Right.
We share a lot in terms of discrimination and looking at the color of your skin, and there's still that light-dark type of mentality and two different systems going on some places based on how you look. Unfortunately, my mother recently shared something with me, how when she was growing up, there was this social club and they would stand outside and watch people dancing. And they just wanted to see the beautiful outfits, but they were not allowed. Right. They weren't fair-skinned and they were not of that social. I thought, if you knew how to dance, why wouldn't you be allowed? She's like, everyone knew, you just were not allowed. Those were I guess, the children of the Spanish descent who were doing the dancing in the ballrooms and the beautiful gowns, and people would literally stand on the sidewalk and take a look and just watch and laugh because some of the steps were missteps and they were into their rhythm. Music and their rhythm and they thought it entertaining. That was their entertainment. Right. So we're here talking about the Afro-Latinos and connection perceptions. We're going to perceptions about today's economy. We're going to move to that particular topic. I do share with Tony the feeling that when you go to some place like Cuba, for example, you find that people have culture, they have community, they have a lot of differences, they have a lot of challenges, but there's some kind of tenacity that goes beyond their economy. Their economic system, as you said, there's a different system for them and different system for tourists like us. I don't find anybody talking about this. So this is why we're here sitting there today. We're just rapping and rolling, and hopefully, we'll keep these conversations going. But what is your perception when you visit places like Cuba? We have that in common. I haven't been to too many other places other than Central America, Panama, but maybe you've been to Cartagena. I've been to the DR. I've been to PR, but specifically Cuba, we're gonna just hone in on that a little bit more today. And what do you see, and that how people are perceived to cope with their economy? And let's just compare that to how we look at it today. You're a finance man, as I said. Tony is here and doing a lot of investigating at JP Morgan Chase and working hard. So I think his mind is already into finance and what the system is like, and hopefully he sees people, how they're coping with it, especially people of color. So what do you think abroad and here about the perceptions of coping with today's economy? Do people perceive African people still as lazy, that needs to be pull yourself up by the bootstrap? If you come to this country, poor people that can't make it over here, but if you make it to America, you can make it. And if you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, everyone can really, thrive and thrive here. That's the word I'm looking for. Is what do you think about how they cope? Can people thrive here, or should they be struggling to just get here and make their dreams happen, pull themselves by the bootstraps, and work really hard to
Right.
make it in America? What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's something that like I've thought about a lot when you really look at how slavery ended and how the Jim Crow era ended. So that I think that affected the way or our ability to accumulate wealth significantly, where we were 100 miles behind the finish line of everyone else, mostly our white counterparts, when we were accumulating wealth. So we weren't able to build that generational wealth, and it was like we were starting from 1968 um, up until the present. So,
Okay. Okay.
so Cuba. Well, just to stick to here, a little bit. There was a lot of areas where I thought we could have improved. It was kind of like they just threw us into society and expected us to swim. When you first start to learn how to swim, some people have that approach where they just push you in the water and hope the best for you. I think that's what they did with African people collectively, um, and they redlined us into different neighborhoods and did different, withheld us from applying for certain loans when we did have a little bit of money saved up. Banks wouldn't necessarily lend to us if you want to, purchase a mortgage. So that's a little bit different when you're talking about abroad because, in the capitalistic system, we've always been a capitalist system in the U.S. where, anyone really had the opportunity to grow.
Good point.
And to obtain that, so quote unquote American dream. But if you've held a certain people, specifically people of African American descent, back for so long, they're not able to, or we are not able to, obtain that type of dream or obtain everything we want. We are behind. We're disadvantaged.
It's not a myth. It's reality.
It's definitely reality. But other ethnic groups, who may be people of color, they've had the opportunity to build generational wealth in their own countries, and then bring that wealth here, and then invest in stores. I know in Washington Heights specifically, people of Dominican descent, have had the opportunity where they come and they pool their money together and buy a bodega, buy a certain building, and put the bodega at the bottom, and they're able to make money off of that, and they pass that through the family. So the father runs it, the daughter or son runs it, 50 years later, and they just keep building wealth off of that. Everyone is going to need a store. But we as African people don't have that we didn't have that opportunity in the US. Cuba is a little different where before 1959. It was an open free market, more towards a dictatorship that did have where you did have the opportunity to build wealth, but there was still a lot of segregation. There was still a lot of corruption within the government. It wasn't as people portray it, as nice as people portray it, like versus what the system is now. It was still a dictatorship. You still had the government doing whatever they wanted,
right?
And they were underneath the thumb of the U.S., especially the mafias back in the days, where they controlled the local government, especially in La Habana, where they had the casinos and
I'm
things
glad
like
you
that
said
around
that.
the city.
Tropicana.
Yeah, exactly. And they were funneling different money, but there was still a lot of segregation where, okay, if you're a person of African descent, you want to go to Tropicana, you couldn't really get in there without being somebody like Celia Cruz or someone that famous. Back in the days, you had to really be famous in order to enjoy the same type of amenities that people with whiter skin or people who were more successful when they had that wealth. Fast forward to now, current day Cuba, underneath the Castro regime, um, they've made little advances. It's still areas, where they can improve. I would hope that they move towards a more open government where they are trading with their partners, and the U.S. lifts the embargo, and they're able to reap the benefits off of that. But I think people.
Hold that thought.
Mhm.
Hold that thought.
Yeah.
We are here today talking with Tony Haywood
Yes.
and Mr. MBA, working out of JP Morgan Chase.
Talking up a storm.
But this is the Afro-Latino Connection, and this is our inaugural program. We're here as two Afro-Latinos
Mhm.
in the United States, both of us born and raised in the great New York City,
Mhm.
Brooklyn specifically.
Exactly.
But there are some things that we'd like to just dive into and explore a little bit more, especially concerning being people of color. So we're going to have Tony Haywood continue
Mhm.
with his message and his topic, because we find that not too many people are aware, not too many people can identify and can relate and have things to discuss, and maybe they do. So that'll be the really pleasant surprise. But we're just casting that net, throwing it out there, and really pleased to have him with us today. And let's continue.
Pleased to be here.
We are comparing the perceptions of economy in America and the historical context of what happened in Cuba, and specifically how you feel that it can develop. I'd love to have you continue on that topic, because yes, before 1959, things were really corrupt.
Mhm.
Now things are a little bit different, and people are blaming the embargo. But the perception, I'll just give you this: the perception is that if you get here, you'll be so much better off than if you stay in your own country and just try to wing it out. There are some differences. Obviously, there's some pros and cons, and maybe more pros. But I think that some people, really do everything that they can possibly do to get to this wonderful country of America. And it might be sadly disappointed. It takes them a little bit longer. As you said, not many
Mhm.
people have had generational wealth to pass along like other people in other countries. And then they come here and they start from something.
Exactly.
I love that. But if you come to this wonderful country, it is wonderful. You might be a little bit surprised about equality and things about diversity. You may be a little bit surprised. I'm really happy that not only do we have a financial expert who can talk to us about things about the economy, he's also a little bit of a scholar. So let's have him finish
That's
on
right.
that theme about, what it looks like in Cuba, and hopefully what would happen if that embargo lifts. People blame the embargo as the end all. That's going to change lives. Our people, let me have you continue with that, because I know people are coping, running restaurants. I stayed at an Airbnb when I went to Havana, and it was lovely. But you can still see the struggle. I mean, they're not all clear. And if the embargo lifts, will it be, um, would it be the end all? Would it be euphoric and just like, oh, this is really what they've been waiting for? It won't be Shangri-La for a lot of people, I tell you that. But
Yeah.
let me have you continue with your thought.
I mean, I'm not, it's not to say that if, the embargo is lifted, there won't be any issues. My point of view is that, it's not any, a knock against the U.S. government, but I feel as if they're waiting for some type of benefit on, the Cuban side for them to give them access to,
Good point.
their future. So that's the future in tourism. That's the future in business, hotel development around the country. So they can just come in and say, okay, we have some type of stake in this. There's a reason for us to lift the
Thank you.
embargo. So there's not really an issue with, as they say, um, what is it, the human, treating humans badly, basically. Which they say is like the the human part of it. Oh, the cash regime is, terrible to human. Communism is bad for, society. Because we do business with China, and, correct me if I'm wrong, that's a socialist country. Russia is a socialist country.
Right.
You know, often the president acts without regard for anyone else. You know, they can make unilateral decisions. So
Correct.
if you're telling me that all dictatorships are bad, then we should be moving to abolish all dictatorships. Why are we working with some countries versus others? That's what you got to look at. But people specifically in Cuba have coped well if you look at it from a relative perspective. So, you know, you have the ability to, you know, have the Airbnb. You know, the taxes are really high. You know, unfortunately, I hope, you know, they lower that a little bit and allow people to make more money off of that. But
Right.
you know, the family I stay with, you know, very close to me. They have a few properties in La Havana, around the city, in La Havana Vieja, the old town. They have a few properties around there where, you know, they can have that stream of wealth.
Right.
So you have several properties where you're coming in, and you know they can make 10 to 20 times what their normal salary would be if they were just regular workers, regular engineers, or they were doctors or something like that, because you have that monthly salary and that's where you're kept. You know, but you know, people now have the opportunity to, okay, you say you can go to school, you know, you can build a certain amount of wealth driving, you know, a taxi or something like that. You can invest in property that's been yours, use that to buy another property, and then have those two stream of incomes come together, and then just keep building on top of that. You have that opportunity now because, you know, Airbnb came in 2016, mid 2016.
So we're not waiting for the bloqueo
Exactly.
to end for them to make a little bit of wealth.
Right.
Specifically, we're discussing Cuba. And I've noticed that they are able to make a little. I wouldn't say everyone is thriving.
Right. I would say.
But it's going to lead me to my next point, but I'm going to have you finish that thought about this embargo ending and where do you think it's all going? Because I'm talking as an American, as he is, the quality of life. The quality of life. I really want to just end on that topic. What's a quality of life and the perception of poverty that one gets when they think about a country like Cuba. You know, what is the perception of poverty? So we'll end on that, but I'll have you finish that thought about how wonderful it will be when this bloqueo ends. And, you know, if you see corruption involved, people are making a little bit now. I won't say everybody's thriving, but they're coping and they're living. And so what do you think will be when this so-called bloqueo ends? I hope our country will not really just swarm in and try to get their hands in everything, which we already have a suspicion that, you know, maybe that's their intention of having, you know, a lot of properties and having some kind of say in Cuba's government and a little bit of control. But, you know, it won't be ideal for every Cuban. What do you think about this bloqueo ending and what might happen?
Well, I think specifically, so there's a group in Miami now who partners with Cubans on the island, and they have like a clothing design, you know, like a clothing brand, basically. So you can buy the clothing brand in Cuba. You know, it's made by Cubans, but they process it in Miami. So their biggest partner, obviously, is going to be people on the East Coast, because that's where they can reach people fastest. So if you order a shirt and let's say it says "Acere" or something like that, something cool, it's like really cool sayings on the shirts, and it's doing really well despite being relatively new. So I think once that blockade ends, you'll have an opportunity for people to do that same thing. So the young people are going to be that driving force behind creating new revenues of new streams of revenue.
For example, sorry to interrupt that thought, but I went to Fabrica de Arte, FAC, and I, you know, went into a little kind of like a boutique shop, a little niche, a hole in the wall, and there were some really pricey pieces of clothing there, you know, nice 100% cotton bags and just really simple clothing, t-shirts, etc. And I believe they said they had a website. right? So they're
Exactly.
marketing, they're selling, they're doing their thing, but the bloqueo has not ended. What's the big push for it to end? And will the pros outweigh the cons once this bloqueo ends? Am I thinking that many governments will be in there trying to control Cuba or the Cubans and tell them what to do with their government once we say, okay, bloqueo ends. You have to give in order to get a return. What do you think? What do you see might be going on there?
I mean, I would hope that there's some specific contract that states, right out the back, what we can do in there
Very good.
and what we can't do versus, having it be something that's a verbal agreement which says, okay, if you guys, invest more in the people, if the Cuban governments invest more in improving the social conditions for the Cuban people, okay, we're gonna lift the embargo because that it's a little open for interpretation. They can move to um, and employ like restrictions later if they feel like they're not meeting their ends. They can it can come to bite the Cuban people and in the behind. Versus them having that contract which says, okay, we'll lift the embargo. You can trade freely with the U.S. You can trade freely with Puerto Rico, and then, the other surrounding countries, without us blocking it. If you have that contract in place, there's an agreement. Everyone benefits.
Yeah.
You can't come in here and build on
Good.
the Cubans' property.
Very good.
Give Guantanamo back, Guantanamo Bay, the naval base back to Cuba, back to the people.
Good point.
And make it so that, okay, the U.S. is invested solely in the development of the Cuban people and not their own interests. Like, of course, um, there's going to be an interest for them, so to speak, but I want them to at least help us build up Cuba.
Good
so that
points.
young Cubans stay and it becomes a developed country, or more developed country rather, and keep that younger generation in there where they have the most innovative personalities, they have the most artistic
Yes, they do.
personalities, they have the music,
Yes, they do.
they have this like the wealth of knowledge.
They do.
There's no shortage of that in terms of education. The majority of people you meet are going to be well educated regardless of what they do. That's my experience. I think that's most people's experience.
Why is
You
that in
meet,
Cuba that they're well educated? What do you think?
well, I mean, the access to education is open, so it's not exactly free, but it costs less, significantly less than the U.S. So you're able to go for your doctorate and have it
Wow.
cost maybe 20 pesos, 20 pesos. If that. So you can study as much as you want.
Wow.
If it benefits your career. Usually people do it up, whatever field they're in. So
And young people are not racking up student debt. Is that
you know,
correct?
and you're not racking up student debt. The reason why people study more in Cuba because you're not racking up that heavy student debt. So you can study as many topics as you want
I love it.
and have that benefit your career. If you don't like something, you can move to another major or something like that and not have that hurt you. Whereas in the US you have to stay focused on
Right.
what you want. 4 years,
Right.
4 or 5 years, make sure that it benefits you. You can make an earning
Right.
where there's not that much emphasis, for the Cuban people to say, okay, I have to be this doctor to make this type of earning, or
That's what we do.
I have to be this MBA. I have to get this MBA to make this earning. They generally want to learn
Good points.
because it's something that they're interested in. They
And
have
it
that
doesn't cost them the house.
right. It
It
doesn't
doesn't cost them the rest of
Mhm.
their lives, paying off student debt for the rest of their lives. That's
Exactly.
not what's happening. So I have a friend, hello amiga, that I met, and she invited me to Vedado, and she graduated from the Universidad de La Habana,
A
Havana
great
University,
Great
and
university.
I think she's doing her second year at Harvard. She went 1 year, and they invited her back. So yeah, she's doing great. Keep up the good work. So I think that she comes here and she's competitive.
Mhm.
And how is she competitive? She got that right from the University of Havana. I mean, their education must be pretty good. If
Mm-hmm.
you can compete, you can come to the United States and compete, and they want you, and they want you to come back. So I'm saying that Cuba has some things going for them. As I said, everybody is not thriving, but if this bloqueo ends
Mm-hmm.
and the blockade ends, will all of them be better off? And should everybody really be pushing and struggling to get to this wonderful free country, which is free? But, there are some myths here that, if you just continue to push yourself and work hard, what tends to happen is that some people think that they can start out one way, they have a little bit of money, they end up taking out loans, and you wouldn't believe that you're passing on debt to the next generation.
Mm-hmm.
So unfortunately, people of color have racked up a lot of debt. I don't like it. I don't like debt. I don't like the fact that historically, we've been disenfranchised. If it's true
Exactly. That's a
that
good
people
word,
of
too.
color have made many people in the world rich,
Mm-hmm.
and so if they've made many people in the world rich, the least they could do is what Cuba is doing and give them a comparable education with what the world standard of great education is, and not penalize people and really make them feel like they have to take out a student loan, pay back for the rest of their lives, and they can't afford it. They can't get here. They can't compete for these scholarships and these fellowships. Do not make them feel that way, especially people of color.
Mm-hmm.
Reparations is not even thought of that way. Not to say now, but way back when. Whatever happened, there's never been 40 acres and a mule, much less, okay, you know what? Anybody who's of Native American descent or a person of color has literally made this country what it is, made it rich, and not just that, the Caribbean and the world for that matter, made the
South
world
America,
gilded gold and filthy rich. So,
Europe.
that being the case, education should literally be tuition free
Mm-hmm.
for all of us, all people of color. And so that is the perception that I'm looking at, that you come here and things are going to be fantastic. And when for the last maybe, we got less than 10 minutes or so, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Haywood, and we are going to finish up talking about perceptions of poverty, especially in the Latino American country. And we're discussing Cuba today. Just so happens we have that connection. Both of us are Brooklyn natives, and we have a Cuban descent, right? Our families are from Cuba.
Exactly.
And so Tony Haywood is definitely discussing that aspect of it. And quite the scholar, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, he's quite the scholar. I'm really honored to have him as my guest. It's a pleasant surprise to have these conversations. Why? Do you hear a lot of these Afro-Latino conversations going on and on the radio, mainstream media, maybe social media, maybe it's going on. But the fact is that maybe if you sit in social circles, you may not be that entertaining when you want to discuss topics that have to do with being Latino and a person of color. What does it mean? For me, it's really rich. It's cultural. It means that we have a lot to share. We're bridge builders. We are pretty diverse. And the word that keeps coming up in me is that we're resilient. We're resilient. We're diverse. And we're pretty much determined to make it happen in Cuba and here in the United States. But in Cuba, let's get back to that one.
Mm-hmm.
The perception of poverty. They are perceived as people who are literally maybe walking around the streets without shoes, and they're really poor. I know for my experience, going to the Dominican Republic several times, different places, from the La Romana to the capital city, just all around the DR. We went to the Teleférico all the way up in one of those wonderful bread and breakfast places. The name eludes me, Puerto Plata. And it's beautiful. It was touristy when I went. But there were always children who were in need, and they weren't ashamed to ask you. That wasn't the problem. The problem is that you can see that there's a disparity in countries like that. And Puerto Rico, maybe there's still disparity. My heart breaks and still bleeding. I can't even mention Puerto Rico without having like, a part of my family is hurt, and they're hurting like for no reason, it seems. The resources, the ingenuity, the mentality is there, but to me that wound is still not healed, and it's just stretching out of proportion. But we're going to get back to Cuba and talk about the fact that my experience is that being in other Latino countries, I've gone to Panama as well. I haven't seen any homeless people, and I'm not just exaggerating. I went to the east, and then I went to Havana, and yes, I did Varadero, but that's not where I lived. And that's how, I mean, I literally took a 2-hour bus to get to Varadero. I wasn't really staying in Varadero. Like, some people, that's all they want to do is go to the beach in Varadero. But I was living like the locals. And when I went to Guantanamo, I didn't see any homeless people. I saw one man in La Habana who may have been a little unstable and saying something to himself, but since I was walking that way almost every day, taking my 20-minute walk to the La Copelia, the ice cream place where there's a line around the corner. There's a social life, social clubs. I had to pass many of them. Some of them I was thinking, you know what, I better save money, or else by the time I leave here, I'll be broke if I start paying these entrance fees to get into these clubs. Really posh, lights in the ceiling, lights in the floors, really, really like modern and upbeat, and seems like I had a great food menu. That's what I care about. And, it looks like the cocktails that they have and the music selection and the bands they were bringing were pretty good. But I would pass them every day and ask them, what's going on tonight. By the time I got all the way down to La Copelia, where the University of Havana was, I got to see a lot of people. I passed the parks. I passed the children playing day and night. The lights were on for people to lift weights in the park in the evening. So they had their outlets, they had, basketball, they had places where they could lift weights. They could have been training for the Olympics for all I know. There were parks. I passed many, many parks going down the road. And, the particular person who I saw may have been unstable talking to himself. Someone said to me, somebody may give a phone call and he may just get picked up, and they'll call his family. And after calling his family, if they don't come and pick him up, there's always a place for him to stay. They won't leave him just rolling around in the streets. And I thought, novel idea. Look at that. This is so-called a country that is struggling and it really needs, so much. But the hurricane hit everybody, and my poor neighbors, Puerto Rico, still suffering. Cuba's back up and running.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they treat people like people, and I didn't see any homeless people. I rode the bus to La Habana Vieja almost every other day, and I didn't smell anybody who like needed a shower and needed a home. And when I got back to New York, that's what I smelled. Literally the night that I came back, that's what I smelled.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the perception of poverty. How bad is it in Cuba? And, what do people think when they think about places like Cuba? It's really impoverished. Oh, we need the bloqueo to be lifted for people to make some money and live. Are they walking around with no shoes? Are they, really, what kind of poverty is it that they have? And let's break the myth.
No, I think when people really think about Cuba, they think that the entire country, people have that perception where the entire country is poor, where it's relative to that country. It's not the poor where you see, okay, in New York City, you may see a beggar, a couple of beggars on the train, or people sleeping, on the sidewalks and stuff like that. But it's a little different, mainly because for a capitalist country such as the U.S., nothing against capitalism, but there's always going to be that portion of people who are going to be poor, unfortunately, for the capitalistic system. Socialism and communism creates that dynamic where more than likely, the average person is the same. So they have that same amount of wealth, or they have the same amount of opportunity to accumulate wealth.
So why are they not begging on the streets and running behind me like they do in other Caribbean countries? Why are they not coming behind you going, listen, can I have $1? Yeah. They do that here in the U.S. They do that in other Caribbean countries. Why didn't I see that in Cuba, on the east or in the west?
They do it to a certain degree, but it's not. Okay. It's not in your face. So they will never. Most of the time, they're never in your face unless you're flashing like a water cast. Like nobody's ever hounding you. Like I've been to India, in Colombia, places like that where they were pretty much hounding you.
Exactly.
You know, in Cuba, there's most people, if you need money, you're gonna be out playing music, doing
Thank
something
you.
creative. You have the opportunity to do something creative to earn the money, versus where in the U.S., you know, you can do, not to, you know, knock against how people beg, or how people are perceived as homeless, but you know, people, you can sit on the sidewalk and, you know, have a cup and, you know, beg for cash that way. People are a lot more creative, I would say, in Cuba with, if they need extra money, but it's not to the extreme where in, you know, Jersey City there's this whole group of people. Once I leave the train station, that's homeless. They've been there since I've moved there,
That's a
and
career of homeless. A
exactly,
career. They made a career out of it.
exactly.
You
But
won't
there's
see that in
no,
Cuba.
you won't really see that in Cuba because there's no, number one, there's a lot more places in Cuba for, you know, to house people who are struggling, who are
Ah,
quote unquote, you know, struggling, or impoverished, beyond what it means to be impoverished in Cuba, because that's relative as well. You know, due to the average salary of the Cuban person in Cuba. But there's this grand myth that, you know, if you somehow make it to Miami or something like that, you know, where the majority of Cubans are, you know, outside of, you know, Union City, New Jersey, you know, this area over here, North Bergen, Jersey. That, okay, if you make it to Miami, you'll be, you know, you'll be rich, you'll be dipped in gold, and everything will be great.
the myth breaker.
Well, you know,
Thank
it's not that, it's not so much that, because you have other obstacles to overcome. You have to get your citizenship,
Right.
which is different because the laws change. The
Right.
wet foot, dry foot law changed, so you can't just come and you know, automatically get citizenship and be set up with housing and you know, different things like that to help you get on your feet. You know, English classes and things like that. So what happens is now, in Miami, there's well, first of all, you know, it's you know, it's a highly populated city. There's a lot of crime. You know, it's a lot of things that you really didn't have to consider in living in Cuba. In Cuba, there's very relatively little crime. Number one, because there are no guns, there are no drugs. Well, you know, a lot less than, um, you know, a lot less in Cuba, than it is, you know, some you know, some place like Miami. There's a lot more crime in Miami, but it's sort of like an equation. It's like there's never a perfect system, I think, for
Good
eight
point.
people, and I
Good
think,
point.
you know, and I think Cuban, you know, the Cuban people is a, you know, are a perfect example of this, because in Cuba you have very little crime, very little theft, very little drug use, you know, and things like that. But in Miami, it's a lot different. So it's kind of like, okay, do you want to have the opportunity to move to the U.S. and be subject to crime, or you want to go to Cuba and be safe, but have the opportunity to earn less money? It's like, what do you trade in order to feel comfortable? There's no perfect system.
And fill your soul with creativity, because
Right.
with with all the commercialism and with all the money that we have,
Hmm.
are we fueling our passions, our souls? Are we fueling our creativity?
Right.
Are we drowning it chasing a dollar? I
That's the that's
love the
the
fact that yes,
that's what you have to
you
think
can be
about.
poor in a certain aspect, but are you, I find that the Cuban people are really fueling some of the things that they like to do. Some of them have to do things just for work, but they can study, tuition free for the most part, and fuel their passion. They sing, they dance. The arts are proliferate. They are
Hmm.
just proliferating, and this is a communist government. So we want you to continue on that, on the different systems, and wrap that up for us, because what do you want?
Yeah, and I was thinking about something before. Someone posted. I follow like a Cuban group. Um, you know, and it's really funny because every day is like a post about Castro, and most of the people live in the U.S. Let's be honest. Most of the people who are posting on these internet groups, you know, focus around the, you know, the Cuban diaspora, live in the U.S. or they live in Spain, Madrid. It's like where a lot of Cubans, you know, live outside of you know, some of the other countries, you know, some of the other South American countries as well. But there was this post where this gentleman was saying, okay, you know, due to communism, this is why this accident happened, or this crime happened, or something. There was something like that. But I was saying, like, look at the other Latin American countries where you have the same population, same sample size. You look at Honduras, you look at Colombia, you
Good
look at
point.
other Central American countries, you look at other South American countries. They have open governments. So are you saying that communism is bad strictly because people, for the most part, don't have the opportunity to grow and obtain money, or are you saying that these other systems are so much better that for every country that has that system, the people have to be doing well? Well, we know that's not the
Hmm.
case. If you look at Honduras, where crime is high,
Right.
people are protesting in the street due to the corruption of a government that's supposed to be, that you said is supposed to be better than communism, better than a dictator. But they're protesting in the street because he quote unquote rigged the election. And then you
And let's
have
not talk about Venezuela.
Venezuela. You have a country such as that. You have Argentina, where inflation is high. People are still protesting. That's one of the better Latin American countries. People
It's
still
true.
have gripes against the government.
Good
Colombia,
point. Good point.
places like Colombia, where they're being strained by their brother or sister country in Venezuela, where people are coming across the border. There's the same type of animosity between. There's usually like animosity between a lot of border countries. Even though you may speak the same language, you
Good
may look
points.
exactly the same. There's always that animosity. Mexico and Guatemala, they're always fighting because people from Guatemala usually always try to migrate to Mexico to eventually go to the U.S. But they have a border wall. They have different things like that. So it's like, okay, what system is the perfect system? If you have a gripe against communism in the Cuban government, and you claim to be high and mighty because you live in the U.S. and
Right.
you claim that the system is so bad, what system would you prefer for the Cuban people, and would it eventually benefit them? Do you want them to be more Puerto Rico, where they've been historically taken advantage of,
Right.
or do you want them to be their own sovereign country and have an opportunity to choose their own government? It's like there has to be some type of balance. You can't say you want this and then this is the outcome, and you say, okay, well, at least they had the opportunity. At least they tried. You
Wow.
know,
I love it.
it's something to think about, though. It's definitely something
What
to
do
think
you
about.
want? Right.
Is what do you want?
This is
Yeah.
it. So we have to come back. We have
Yeah.
to invite our economist, our scholar, Tony Haywood, back. I really have found I've learned a lot today. I think that you know your history.
Yeah.
He keeps visiting Cuba on a regular basis, and this year was my first year. It was my first time visiting. I went twice. I was doing a bit of research and doing a comparative study, and I think I'll keep that up. And I was comparing it with post-communist Czech Republic and now communist Cuba, and we were discussing if the artists are the catalyst for change.
They definitely are.
Where do you see the change going if the artists are the voices, and the artists in Cuba are really proliferate. They're speaking, they're saying things, and not all of them are saying, you know what, I can't wait to get out of here. Like my friend who was at Harvard just literally said that to me. It's not like, I feel choked and I want to just get out. It's just that I appreciate the opportunity to, learn things like maybe English, for example, or, learn more things. And I'm focused more on that than to say I want to escape. So she's young. You think that the mentality is that I have the opportunity to go to Harvard, I might just have to stay out here forever. I didn't get that from her behavior. The places that she's taken me in Cuba were really artistic and creative and just really fulfilling. And I find that she had a good social life, a good family life, and a fantastic education. And I really appreciated seeing the side of it, and the perception of poverty that I was going in there with. That myth has been broken, and I thank you for adding another layer to it. We can discuss the more and more layers, because, as we said, you and I are actually, basically opening the door to this a little bit. I don't know if you shared with our audience that you hadn't always been going to Cuba as a child. I know I didn't have that opportunity, because of the financial difficulty that it was to pay for a visa. I had a couple of siblings, so my parents found it hard to save the money to take all of us at the same time. So, for me, it didn't happen until I was an adult, and fortunately, it just recently happened. For you, had you been going to Cuba for year after year, and
I try to go now because I'm an adult, number one, and growing up, even though we were here in the U.S., like I said, you still don't have the opportunity where, okay, once you get here, you strike it rich. We grew up very poor. It was very poor, very very we were struggling basically, but it wasn't like, my God, we're struggling. It's like, we really have to watch our money. We really have to, be careful. I grew up in a big family of, 6. So, for me, I always wanted to, plan to amass my own wealth with, what I have in my head, basically the knowledge. So my opportunity was, okay, I have this knowledge, thankful to God. Thanks to God. And I have the opportunity to chase my dreams, what I want to do, business, whatever it may be, finance. I have the opportunity because, I studied a lot, so what do you have to do? You have to get a career or start a career, start from the bottom. What do you want to do? Want to be in customer service. Okay, a couple of years here, then you look for another job. You network with people who you know in the industry. Okay, you get a higher paying job. Then once you put in the time there, you get a higher paying job. Now you have the salary and the income to not only save money, but to help your family out as well. And all of a sudden, you're not as poor as you used to be. Now you have the opportunity to go explore your roots, see where your ancestors worked so hard just to get you in this opportunity.
And I'm happy that you thanked God for it, because obviously some people have that intention. They're doing nothing wrong. Ladies and gentlemen, there are people here, they're doing nothing wrong. They are pulling themselves out by the bootstraps. They are working hard. And you don't know, it could be an illness, right? They could fall off, okay? You get into some kind of debt. You're not traveling. You're just wishing, you're wanting. You're going from job to job. You're struggling. Okay, so we are really, really grateful to our Creator, and I really thank you. We have been playing Timba live from Miami, La Habana, and we're playing Ave Maria Que Calor, and this is Tony Haywood. He dances. He dances currently, I don't know if it's professionally or recreationally right now.
It's definitely a good passion. Definitely a good passion.
Awesome. I have my passion. I, sing classically with Brooklyn College Conservatory and the Symphonic Choir, and we have performances all around Brooklyn. And, I thank Dr. Malcolm Merriweather, for teaching us all this wonderful music and the repertoire. But you have your repertoire and your teachers, and you keep it real. And we're going to mambo one day. We're going to salsa. We're going to rumba. We're going to do all of that. And we're going to leave you today, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back for our next discussion on the Afro-Latino Connection. And hopefully I'll have different people from the diaspora. But I'm going to have Mr. Haywood back because obviously he's teaching me. And I know a little bit about my own culture, but I'm sure it's interesting to you because there are not a lot of people who want to explore these topics at length. People don't have the patience for it. They don't have the proclivity to dive into things, and it doesn't mean anything much to them. Maybe they just want to forget where they come from, or the troubles and the struggles were so much. But I'm exploring it. I'm loving it. And I thank you for being with us. We're going to leave you again with Timba Live from Miami and La Habana music. Ave Maria Que Calor. And we'll be back sometime soon. Thank you. Join us again next time.
Acabando, cuando salgo caminando, mira, no siento ninguna brisa. Y enseguida me doy cuenta, mami, como suda mi cabeza.